Sunday morning in the Eastern Hemisphere on this tiny island in Southeast Asia in the Andaman Sea, and it's 2 days removed from the news about Anthony Bourdain. And, before anyone says anything, oh, you didn't know him, his act was selfish, this is just another example of, celebrity worship and, people falling from high pedestals and blah, 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 before any of the negative stuff slides into your brain pan, into your consciousness regarding this. I've been following Bourdain since Kitchen Confidential, since he wrote that first book. And when cable allowed, I followed his shows. I didn't get to see Cook's Tour, though I did later through YouTube. But I was a religious follower of No Reservations. I loved his voice. I loved his wit. I loved how he came across, like, as others have said this, like punk philosopher king. I loved how he didn't suffer fools. I liked the curmudgeonly side. I liked the tattooed badass. I liked that he drank and smoked and was not afraid to share his sometimes guttural appreciation for the fairer sex. I love that he had been through so much. I have a deep and profound respect and, might I say, resonance for people who have, walked the path of suffering, who get it, whether it's by their choice or whether it's imposed on them by reality. And that's the thing, right? People will say, like his mother even said recently in the news, well, he had everything. He had everything, and I don't know why he would do this. He seems like he would be the last person to do this, and I can't process it at all. Meanwhile, I'm here, and the news came up, and I went cold. I went cold because it was like that penny dropping where you always knew something was going to happen and secretly hoped, or not so secretly hoped, that it wouldn't, and then it does, and you go, fuck my instincts and fuck the uncanny awareness of the secret lives of others. Empathy is a bitch that way. And, Anthony joked throughout his tenure on No Reservations and The Layover, and as things got more serious with the political aspects of Parts Unknown, he joked that the world was hard, that at times he was just railing against meaninglessness, that there's a loose quote of him, you go through the world and you try to leave just your little mark on it. I used to say, you write your name in the sand as the tide's coming in. But you go through the world and you leave a little mark on it. And the thing is, the world, in turn, in response, leaves its mark on you. These marks and scars on your skin, these moments imprinted upon your heart, your psyche, your spirit, your soul. And as he said, many of them are beautiful. They're the most beautiful things from your life, the way the world has seared itself upon you. But he was also very open with the fact that many of those experiences were hard and were painful. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to see that a person who struggled with addiction profoundly in his 20s, who said openly, oh yeah, I tried all these different ways to kind of kill myself, I could just never commit, ha ha ha. Be it heroin, cocaine, binge drinking and benders through his chef's job, or when he started to travel and promote his projects and go to dangerous places. He joked about having a death wish. He also joked, even after the birth of his daughter, he's like, well, maybe this will tone down those self-destructive thoughts now. I don't think I'd do anything to hurt myself at this point. I care about someone else more than myself for the first time. And I'm not saying this, I'm not posting this to judge either way. Oh, he was a great man. He had done many great things. He had inspired others to see the world and other cultures through a different lens, through the medium of food, but also through television, these video essays, these poems. His ability to make you feel like you were right there with him on the journey, that you were meeting these people in Asia and Africa, in the Middle East, in remote areas of North America, like the Rust Belt and the flyover states, in Canada, God forbid. And he was good at what he did. He wrote beautifully and honestly. He was raw. He was a proponent of, a defender of, a cheerleader for the underdog. the dispossessed, and I found that I really felt a kinship with him for that, for those who are oppressed, for those who are weaker, for those who suffer, for those who toil and work so hard and never get a break. I think his formative year experiences, his life up until 40, those struggles, informed him in that, which is why he becomes this folk hero in our eyes. But there was always something beyond the heavy drinking and chain smoking. Hey, I've been guilty of both of those things. Beyond the admission of drugs, beyond the jokes of, I'm sure I'm going to get tied up and be found hanging somewhere in a hotel, which is telling, not so much ironic, just telling. There was something that always nagged at me in those, God, I forget how many seasons of No Reservations aired on the Travel Channel. I'm thinking 10, at least 8. And, here's this rock star chef. And the opening title sequence after he would do the first bumper and it would break into, As I Walk in This Beautiful World or whatever. That part's unknown. I might be getting confused. It doesn't matter. The point is, his voiceover ended before the big sting with, I'm Anthony Bourdain, I write, I travel, I eat, and I'm hungry for more. That's the warning bell for me. By all accounts, Anthony Bourdain was a workaholic. By all accounts, he traveled 200 plus days a year away from his family and friends, isolating himself. Happiest when he was drinking alone at some speakeasy or dive bar in some remote corner of the world. I think that says something about his character, and more importantly, the fact that he plunged headfirst happily in his memoirs. Happily, he spoke of plunging headfirst into addiction, committing himself to it, as he was committing himself to his cooking career. And then he replaced that later by diving headfirst into workaholism with his shows, with his books, with his publishing empire, with his, restaurant influence, with the shows that he produced for other people. If you take a look at his CV, at his resume, is how many fingers or how many pies he had his prodigious fingers in. Countless. And there are friends now coming out, his chef pals and others and exes who have said Anthony could not stop. He could not stop working. He could not stop being busy. He could not stop indulging because he was afraid. His friends have spoken on record that he had a gripping fear of mortality, of the end of this life, of the meaninglessness of life and the things that he was doing, which probably is why he was so passionate about railing against inauthenticity. He wanted a vulnerable and authentic experience. He wanted to hold people to task. He wanted to shine lights on both sides of the equation. This is probably why I loved his Israel and Palestine episode so much, because he was opening up a window into a world where we get a pretty skewed perspective. And I was moved by his courageousness in that regard. But at the same time, he was an addict. That's not a judgment. He was addicted first to substances, then to work and the prestige surrounding work, to busyness, to portraying this persona to the world, to being productive, to living up to this barometer or temperature gauge of capital S success, and yet he still took his own life. In a darker moment, somewhere across the sea, in this case France, in a luxury hotel, something happened. His friend Eric Repair said for the last few days he'd gone to a dark place. Could it have been falling off the wagon with his addictions? Could it have been a moment with his now 2-year girlfriend, Asia Argento? I think if you do a little bit of Googling on that, you understand the dynamic of that relationship. I think he defined himself through his work. I think he defined himself through his girlfriends. I think he defined himself through food, but deep down he still felt an ache, a void, a deep dissatisfaction with what life was. So he wrote, he traveled, and he ate more and more and more. He was hungry for more and more and more. That is addiction. It is also, in Eastern Buddhist parlance, it is attachment. He was attached to novelty. He was attached to distraction. He was attached to all these external things and pleasures And hey, we celebrated it. I celebrated it. He loved meat. He loved booze. He loved smokes. He loved beauty. He loved art. He loved politics. He loved classic films and hard-boiled noir and literature up the wazoo. He loved many things, all of these external things. But I think those were all rabbits being chased on a greyhound track. A robot running in a loop. Something beyond himself that he hoped once he caught it, he would finally be happy. And you can do the hunting for the articles, the interviews with him or with his friends, where he's like, well, I should be happy, right? I have everything. Or I'm pretty sure I'm happy now. Or, hey, I've got an amazing daughter and I'm rich beyond belief and I get to do what I want. Of course I should be happy. There was always the should. There was always the could. And I guess I'm posting this because I've chased those things too, and there's still a part of me now as I approach 50. It is looming and it is thunderous, and there is still a part of me that goes, well, if I finally land that perfect gig, if I finally release a project that gets global acclaim again, if I finally find the perfect mate, if I become the perfect dad, if I live in the perfect house, if I get something external, then I'll be okay. Well, Anthony Bourdain is here to remind us that you can have all these things and still not be okay. They don't matter. In the end, they don't matter. Your bank account, where you live, even the people you surround yourself with, it's not you. At your core, if you are still chasing something, if you are still hating yourself, if you are still deeply dissatisfied by the flow of life, if you cannot face it and see it for what it is, and again, going back to Buddhism, I'm not saying it's right, but when you have a whole faith that talks about, hey, life is a long string of suffering with pearls of joy spaced out along it, if we live to expect happiness all the time, to have it sustain us, that it's a measure of who we are, that it means we're good enough because we're happy more often than not, if you use that as your high watermark for what existence is, you're going to hate yourself. You're going to fail. Things will fall apart. You will lose people and things and jobs and money, and as you gaze in the mirror as the decades go by, you lose yourself. If you can't accept as those clouds gather, and as that storm starts to boom on the horizon, and as the clock ticks away and becomes like thunder, and you know your end of days is coming, that you will say goodbye to yourself, capital S, at some point, if you can't shake free of the fear of the fact that life is temporary, that everything changes, that the more you try to hold on and distract yourself, the deeper the suffering burrows within you. If you don't confront that in yourself, you take a bathrobe belt and you put it around your neck in a luxury French hotel and step off the chair. No matter who you are, no matter what you have, you give up, which I understand completely because I've had moments where I've teetered on the edge of that metaphorical chair. You give up. And then the rest of us are deprived of your beauty and your brilliance that shines through the prism of your life experience and your pain. And maybe I'm passionate and maybe I'm feeling emotional about this because I looked up to him so much. Not that I wanted his life exactly, but the freedom of it. That was the appearance of it, right? The freedom of travel and experience and learning and connecting to others and wandering the world and becoming a better person as the world imprints itself upon you. But I guess, like he said, those imprints left upon you by the world can quite often be very deep scars, even wounds that don't heal. And if you don't find a way to look at those wounds, to gaze into the mirror and see all things decaying around you, including yourself at the center of all things, how can any of us go on? How can we? I'm just going to end this thing with a thought I've been having a lot lately in the past few years. It's hard because you cling to this idea of self. I am Brooke Burgess. I am this, a writer or an author or a performer or a potential TV host or a lover and not a fighter and all these things, all these labels. But the truth is, I am going to be, quote, Brooke Burgess unquote, for an infinitely short period of time in the span of the universe, in the span of all things. And yet, I am going to be something else for an infinity of time. Why rush that? Why give up and dive into that? Why not learn the lessons of this schoolyard we are in? For some of you, the prison cell, the life sentence you got coming down here. For others, the enjoyment, the bliss, the distraction, whatever the case, whether the sun is shining for you, whether the clouds are out in full force, whether it's a hurricane, a maelstrom, a snowstorm, sunny days, or crisp autumn with leaves changing, whatever life has been for you or will be for you, it is temporary and it will go away and you will be something else that you cannot possibly fathom. Take a moment, even in your darkest times. Breathe in. Be here now. And then look in the mirror. Yeah, it's absurd. Yeah, it hurts. But it's also funnier than you want to give it credit for. We lost a pretty amazing human being on Friday who touched so many of us, creatives and thinkers and feelers and philosophers alike. I hope if someone sees me going through a dark period, they reach out and go, hey, stop it. I feel what you're feeling, but just take a moment. You don't have that long left. Endure, brother. Put your hand in mine, and let's walk together to make the world a little bit better.